would actually kind of say that's the case. I mean, look at this thing. Like, how long have commercial motherboards been available at all? Like 30 years, maybe? Certainly not 40. They've only been around for a little while. In all that time, none of the manufacturers just decided, why don't we just cover up all the ugly, like, circuitry and the guts of the thing?
Because it wasn't really necessary?
It's not really necessary, but look at how beautiful it is not having that there. Just all these panels there. That's peak motherboard design. You may not like it. I don't remember the rest of the meme, but what a fantastic looking motherboard. God, I want one for myself. How much do these things cost? They don't have the price. If they do, then I'm just not looking hard enough. $230, never mind. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Moffat Library Untitled podcast for information and yuts and other general things.
We have still not posted any yet of this recording. As we mentioned, some of the earlier ones, we are recording these a month ahead of time, so this particular one will probably come out, close to a month. Probably 3 weeks from now, 4 weeks from now. We have not yet posted the first one yet, so we have not yet heard what people want us to call this thing. I think it will probably end up being, what was it? Club Moffat Talks.
Yeah, that was the one that everyone here in the building actually really liked, so I can see us going with that one. It's fine. Like, I came up with that one I think I was browsing Twitter or something, and just the thought hit me, why don't we just call it Club Moffat Talks?
Oh, go ahead.
It had no basis in, like, any sort of revelation or epiphany. It was literally just like, I bet that'd work.
I will say it has been a few weeks since we recorded our first two podcasts, mostly because we have been very busy dealing with instruction and dealing with faculty for the last couple of weeks. And we have actually, in the meantime, had some people here in the building, in-house, listen to our first podcast and second podcast and actually give us feedback on those.
And that feedback turned out to be, don't edit anything.
We will edit a few things because the first one, I believe there is a large period of time in which I go and answer a reference question that someone asked me.
And I can't remember if I babbled at any point during that.
I think you babbled a little bit because I came in, put the headphones back on, and you were in mid-conversation with me, even though I was not there.
Not with you, with the other person who was here, which was also just me.
Yeah.
So as you mentioned before, we've been in the midst of a gauntlet of classes and instruction and a bunch of other things. So we've been.
It is interesting that all the faculty want the instruction at the exact same time.
Literally.
It's usually the last 2 weeks of September and the first week of October is when they want all the instruction, which gives you an idea of when we're actually recording this. So
yeah, we're finally in the midst of October, and it doesn't really look like we have too much else in the near future. I'm seeing one thing like nearer the end of the month, but that's probably. Oh wait, no. Yeah, that's the only one I'm seeing. Also, this is for me. This isn't for anyone else. But by the time this episode goes live, I will have read the third Berserk chapter for the year. So I am on cloud 9, probably by the time this goes live.
You might want to explain what Berserk is to people, because some people probably have no idea.
Berserk's a manga. It's a very good manga, not for the squeamish. If you've ever played the game Dark Souls, a lot of the design for that is pretty openly inspired by Berserk. It's inspired a whole lot of other things. I don't know that I'd say it's my favorite manga anymore, but it's very infamous for going on hiatuses. Last year we got 2 new chapters, and they're only like 15 pages long. This year we're getting a third. So it's very close to the end of the story, and I just want it to be over. It's not like Weekly Shonen Jump where you get every issue is a new chapter of something. This is one where a new issue is very much highly anticipated. Yeah, that's it. I'm just very happy.
Well, supposedly, according to our schedule, This podcast is going to be the last podcast of October. It's going to
Sure.
be the hopefully by this point we will have selected a name for the podcast. We will have selected a movie for our movie madness for October. Since this is the last one of October, this is our last chance to talk about horror, something that both me and Chris really enjoy: horror novels, horror stories, horror literature. I think that's what the idea of today's podcast is going to be, is horror literature, correct?
Well, before we get into that, it's only been 7 minutes, but I'm Chris.
Oh, and I'm Ryan.
How has your week been, Ryan? How has your life been recently?
Well, again, we went through that gauntlet of instruction, and I'm still kind of recovering from it. Also, I had a number of accidents happen yesterday in some of the instruction that I did yesterday, and I'm still recovering from what I think is looking like a fool to students, but as it probably wasn't, but it was probably fine. But
we're going through growing pains from learning how to do a bunch of stuff remotely, but I think it's going to make us stronger in the long run. It's going to give us more options for how we actually approach instruction.
Yeah, hopefully. And a lot of the faculty, I was surprised the number of faculty that were open to Zoom. When we first mentioned the fact we would be doing Zoom sessions to the faculty in August, a lot of the faculty were like, well, I don't want anything to do with that. But it's turned out there's actually have been a number of faculty very open to it. And the ones that are open to it are already doing Zoom in their classes. So it's not that big of a jump.
Sure, yeah, and that's just, what is it, after Thanksgiving, everyone's going to be going to Zoom and remote teaching anyway, so yeah. I'm glad for the professors who are actually taking the initiative to start doing these things, even if they're not teaching their actual classes remotely. Just the fact that they're willing to try these things out, the stuff that we kind of have to do remotely, it's going to make their students a little more comfortable, I think, with what's to come. And by the looks of things, nothing will probably change in the spring either. So it's good that we have the roadmap that we can use.
And if any of the faculty are now listening, yes, we do Zoom sessions. If you wish to use us for a Zoom session, if you're usually used to us coming into the classroom and explaining how to do things, or if you're used to coming over and going into our computer lab, we are now covering that with Zoom sessions, which actually work pretty well. Just be aware of that fact for any of our faculty who hopefully are listening to our wonderful podcast, which is, I'm sure by now, is loved and enjoyed by everyone on campus.
Oh, yeah, no, it's going to be the hottest thing since, you know what, I'm not even going to finish that one. I don't know. I was going to be really smarmy about it, but that's not going to happen.
The hottest thing since printed literature. How about that?
Yeah, there we go. The hottest thing in 2020 since printed literature, since printed newspapers.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's talk about some horror. I would love to just shrug off all of my responsibilities and talk about things that scare me.
Okay.
That's why I'm going to talk about my classes.
Favorite horror story, favorite horror literature. What's your favorite horror book?
My favorite horror novel. Oh, that's a tough one. Here's going to be the really embarrassing thing, is that I'm more of a horror visual guy. I'm more of a horror movie and horror video games person. So
you are not unusual in that fact. Most of the millennial and the Zoomer generations are used to horror in the visual medium through video games, through movies, not a horror in the form of literature. So that is not unusual at all.
I'm going to make professors' lives a lot harder right now. Students, why don't you propose your literature essays on video game stories and see how that turns out? I would love to start seeing more people talk about video game stories and visuals and everything from an academic standpoint. So why don't you go ahead and do that this year and let me know how it turns out?
I'll actually throw a little history here. Keep in mind that it's interesting how things work. When the novel was first created a few hundred years ago, it was viewed as trash. It was viewed as something to entertain the commoners. It wasn't real literature because it was fiction. It wasn't nonfiction. and that no one would actually ever study the novel because the novel's just this trashy little bit of entertainment that just, people who aren't true intellectuals read. You go back to when films started coming out. This was, trashy, spendable types of entertainment for the masses. This wasn't anything that you would need to study, or this wasn't high art of any sort. But now, there's film studies. Mm-hmm. I propose that in the next 50 years, we'll begin to see video game studies. When you get the people of the generations who grew up with these interactive role-playing video games that are very in-depth, that have very good storylines, that have lots of emotional ties, and are saying something. They have themes, they have motifs, they have tropes. It's the same thing you see in great literature or great movies you're seeing in video games. I propose in the next 50 years, you will get, once again, the current generation goes off and gets their PhDs, you will see video theory begin to be taught at universities as high art, as great narrative, basically.
I would utterly love to see that. And guess what, students? You are the ones who have to make this happen. So we're counting on you to begin this amazing new trend.
It's like I said before, they're saying, oh, come on, that's just entertainment. There's no actual redeeming values in that. Once again, that's what they said about novels. That's what they said about film. It's something that, the culture adapts and changes.
And more than that, all art is meant to entertain. I think that's something that the snobby types like to kind of ignore. But a lot of academic theory on literature, on movies and stuff, all that's there so that we can break down what it is about these formats and these stories that actually mean something to people.
Well, since you do not have a favorite novel, I will mention probably my favorite horror novel, which is Shadowland by Peter Straub.
Oh, yeah, old Straub, one of Stephen King's best friends.
I'm a big fan of the novels that Peter wrote during the 1980s. This would be Ghost Story, Shadowland, and Floating Dragon. He's a very good horror writer. He did stop writing horror for the most part. He went into more like psychological thrillers after the 80s. I think that was mostly because he felt like he couldn't Stephen King. Again, he was a contemporary of Stephen King, a good friend of his. They wrote, I think, 2 or 3 novels together. I think he just got discouraged by the fact that Stephen was more successful, I wouldn't say better, at writing horror than he was, that he switched genres up a little bit and did start to do something different. I suggest if anyone wants to read, I view it as a great horror story. I will also say that it took me 3 tries to get through Shadowland. It is a tough read at the beginning, but it does pay off later in the novel.
Yeah, actually, I went to NPR's 100 favorite horror stories because I knew I had something in mind, but I couldn't really. This always happens when I have to dig through all the crap that I've read and watched over time. But yeah, one of their top picks for general creepy kid stories is, of course, Shadowland. This is an actual pretty decent little article. There are some solid picks in here. Which actually reminds me of what I think is probably my favorite horror story. I have 2 horror novels that I always go to, and one of them I was kind of iffy about actually mentioning. The first is House of Leaves.
Yeah, very good story.
House of Leaves is about as meta will ever get. It's this labyrinthine... Okay, the book itself is a film editor trying to put together notes from a film scholar who was writing an essay about a movie that doesn't actually probably exist, about a house that in the setting does exist, and the main character is actually the editor of this entire project who goes insane, but his story is only told through footnotes, while the main body of the text is the original scholar's interpretation of the film, even though he's blind and can't watch it.
It's a very unique novel. In fact, I've described it to some of the English professors here on campus as saying it's not actually a novel as much as it's an experiment in deconstructionism. Mm-hmm. And I will stand by that. It is a unique piece of literature. People will cringe when I say this, but I put that up there with some of the stuff that James Joyce has done as far as experimentation with the art form. what you can do as far as literature goes. And again, it is a very deconstructionist, postmodern take, as you said, to be very much more modern. It is very meta. That's in fact the entire theme of it is what does it mean to be an imaginary story, right? As all stories are.
I would say that it is the quintessential postmodern novel. Aside from just being creepy, it is very, I wouldn't say it's outright scary, it's extremely atmospheric though. The actual novel that I would say is my favorite horror novel, like you open the book and you read a story, and like House of Leaves, you're flipping the book upside down and you need a magnifying glass to read some of the pages.
And you find yourself reading the same page 3 times to figure out what the heck's going on. Yeah.
Yes. The book that I would say is probably this is a real book and not a joke, kind of, is Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House.
Oh, very good novel.
I would even say that you've read a short story from her, listener. That short story that you have read that I'm 100% positive of is The Lottery. Very, very good twist ending short story. Also just really creepy. The Haunting of Hill House, though, it's some of my favorite aspects of horror in general. It's a very personal story. The main plot line of this book is the psychological examination of its protagonist. I can't remember her name. Eleanor. Eleanor's her name. She's part of a research group who are in this, I mean, not even ostensibly, this flat-out haunted house. But as things go along, it's not really the house being haunted that's causing the main problems for the group of people in it. It's the individuals, and it's kind of a breakdown of what having very different people in a closed setting will do to people who are not all there or who have problems. And Eleanor has very, very deep psychological issues within the first page.
And it's been adapted several times. In fact, I'd say it's one of the most heavily adapted stories out there, loosely adapted. Any movie you've ever heard about the house on the hill or haunting the hill house or house that's haunted or anything like that is usually referring back to Shirley Jackson's work in some way.
Oh, yeah. There's another book by Richard Matheson called Hell House, I think. That's also been adapted into movies that are called like The House on Haunted Hill. You know what? It's probably fine to get these confused because for all intents and purposes, I've heard nothing but good about Hell House. And Richard Matheson in general is a very beloved horror author, but they're not the same at all, and they're not the same tone whatsoever.
Let me throw one more author out there. Let me just mention that my background is my father was a huge horror reader. I mean, that was his favorite genre. In fact, all my friends called my dad the weird dad because he tended to have a very macabre sense of humor, and he really enjoys horror novels. His favorite author is an actor named Thomas Tyrone, who did novels such as The Other and Harvest Home.
I think you're talking about Thomas Tryon.
Oh, Tryon, sorry.
I think so. I just looked at his books, and he's in my short list of authors I really want to read.
I've read both The Other and Harvest Home. I've not read any of his later stuff. But my dad loved horror so much that it became very easy to deal with like Father's Day presents or birthday presents for him. I just buy him a horror novel. In fact, a few Christmases ago, I bought him the complete Tryon collection, and I bought him the complete Shirley Jackson collection. I hope he's happy about that.
Oh, I would be. I would be very happy with those.
That's interesting because we didn't mention Poe, we didn't mention Lovecraft, we didn't mention Block, and some of the supposedly great horror writers.
I'd like to read some of Block's stuff. In fact, I think I have some. I have an Amazon wish list of just books that I am planning on reading in the near future, and all those names are on there. What's your favorite Poe short story? Or you know what? I'll extend it. What's your favorite Poe short story, and also the one book that he wrote?
That's a good question. A Poe story, probably The Mask of the Red Death.
Very timely. I'm seeing a lot of people quote that last paragraph lately.
I like the fantasy of it. It's one of the few stories he wrote that was overtly fantastical, and I like that aspect of it. Also, as a small child, I was entranced by the Vincent Price movie, The Mask of the Red Death. Just a wonderful, wonderful movie. Well, it's not that great of a movie. For a 6 or 7-year-old, it was just amazing type of movie to watch as a young child and be influenced by.
It's been so long since I've watched that. If I'm thinking of the right one,
it's been a long time since I watched it as well. But again, it is Vincent Price. It is 1950s sometime, I think. Well, we can veer this off into movies if you want to at this point.
Well, I'll just say I don't think I have a favorite Poe story. Probably the Mask of the Cask of Amontillado, maybe the Mask of the Red Death. I like the Telltale Heart a whole lot. Horror movies, though, yeah, we can talk all day about horror movies.
Favorite horror movie?
Well, now that you make me choose, favorite horror movie of all time, forever. You know, I'm gonna say it's between 3 movies. I don't like to pick one single favorite. I could have done that when I was younger, but now there's just too much vying for my attention. So I'm gonna name 3 instead. Is that okay?
That's fine.
The first one, a more modern movie. I wouldn't call it horror in general, but Charlie Kaufman was asked to how he would write a horror movie, and this is what he came up with. It's called Synecdoche, New York. I'd say it's a drama film first and foremost, and it's kind of a satire. It stars Philip Seymour Hoffman. It's about I believe he's a playwright who is also a hypochondriac, and like the world is very exaggerated. It's realistic, but it's got a lot of magical realism. Time is very loose. In the first scene of the movie, the same radio like news report goes through like 4 months within the same scene. It's what Charlie Kaufman had described as his ideal horror movie and his ideal horror story. And it's hard to talk about without spoiling it, so I'll just go on to the 2 that I think are a little more easy to actually identify. The Shining, which is like, I mean, it's The Shining. If you haven't watched The Shining, watch it. We have it here in the library, I'm sure. It's one of the greatest, I wouldn't even say greatest horror movies of all time. It's one of the greatest films ever made. Stephen King would be very upset at me saying that to you. He does not like that film. But it's one of my favorites. It's easily my favorite Stanley Kubrick film.
I think, though, King has come around to the idea that it is a masterpiece. It's just not his story is what his problem with it is.
That's kind of the interesting part of that, too, and I think that elevates it even further. Is The Shining was Stephen King's coping mechanism. It was his therapy to deal with his alcoholism at the time, and Jack is very much an author insert. In fact, he uses a lot of real-world events that happened to him, like he broke his son's arm in a fit of rage. So, therefore, Jack in the novel breaks his son's arm in a fit of rage, and the overall message of it is his message to himself that he is going to end up destroying himself if he doesn't deal with his own issues instead of running to alcohol or other substance abuse. But the movie, on the other hand, is very much a character study of a man who is broken and who is further broken by for real ghosts, like a horrifically haunted location.
And that's one complaint I've seen about the movie is a lot of people are like, Jack was crazy from the beginning. Jack Torrance is Jack Nicholson, and he's already crazy. It's nothing's really changed. And I think that's the thing that made King upset about the film, is that aspect of it.
He was annoyed from moment 1 because they picked that guy from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. and I think it's actually a really great casting for the story that's being told. But for the novel, it's not. I wouldn't even say that they're remotely the same story at all.
They're similar. I'd say it's based on. But by the way, just go on to your third. I mean, we've talked a lot about The Shining.
Sure.
Let's go on to your third, yeah. And then I'll mention my favorite.
That's fair. My third. This one goes back and forth between being my number 1 and my part of my top 3. But it is Eraserhead, David Lynch's first film. Lynch has referred to Eraserhead as his most spiritual film, and when prompted to elaborate on that, he's outright told people, "No, I won't." This is the story of another Jack, I think. I'm pretty sure the main character in that one is named Jack, too, played by, what's his name? Jack Nance? This is the story of Henry. Henry's his name. Jack Nance is the actor. The story of a man who lives in a dumpy apartment that's literally facing a brick wall, living in Philadelphia, which David Lynch has said is his biggest inspiration because it's so trashy and bad. Sorry for anyone who comes from Philadelphia, by the way. It's hard to really nail down something specific about this film, but Henry is alerted to the fact that his, I guess, ex-girlfriend just had a baby, which was extremely premature, but as girlfriend's mom is quick to point out, they don't even know if it's a baby or not. It is this mewling little horrific calf monster that does nothing but scream and can't even move because it's swaddled in such a way that kind of leaves it immobile. And it's another, you'll notice me saying this a lot, but it's a character story of a man who's put into a situation that he doesn't want to, and the steps that he has to take that he normally wouldn't because it's such an extreme situation. Very stark, very, very atmospheric. Kind of a simple story. It's mostly told visually. It's just so well produced. It's just so like viscerally terrifying, and it's universal. I think a lot of people who have had kids or are expecting kids kind of understands the terror of parenthood, and I think David Lynch really nails that very specific horror.
The idea of horror and what horror means in a second, but let me get to my favorite.
Go ahead. Do you have a top?
Let me see if you can guess. Sure. It is. I will tell you this. It is the second adaptation of the John Campbell novella "Who Goes There."
Oh no! How do I not know this? John Campbell. Oh,
John Campbell, favorite analog editor from the 1950s.
Hold on, I'm gonna cheat.
You look it up. Okay.
Yeah, I. This is me.
That's a very librarian thing to do, so I will accept.
Yeah, this is me. Just of course, I'm such an idiot. Yeah, you're talking about The Thing.
Yep, John Carpenter's 1982.
Masterpiece. Just say masterpiece. It is
masterpiece. I was going to say it's considered probably the best use of physical special effects ever done in a movie.
I'll second that. That is The Thing is bar none. Well, okay. There are two films that I would say are the absolute pinnacle of practical effects. The first is Titanic, which isn't fair because that movie had like an unlimited budget.
$500 million, yeah.
But no, not talking about the biggest blockbuster of all time. Yes, this is the greatest use of practical effects ever in a film. I'd actually probably say that it's very close to Hellraiser in terms of practical effects. That movie also has incredible effects. Just in general, all the different things that they do with the practical effects in The Thing. Yeah, definitely.
And I think when you're talking about how Eraserhead is about the horror and the fear of parenthood, I think that Carpenter's Thing is the best examination of paranoia ever done in film, I think.
Oh, yeah.
It's incredibly good. And let's talk about that for a second. The idea of horror is basically talking about fear, about our various fears and stuff like that. And it's interesting because every single movie is talking about some sort of fear. We've talked a lot with Cody Parrish over in the honors program about this. That's his big deal, is about talking about horror and really breaking down what the fears of the time are. And it's always very interesting. And because of that, because it's a lot of times based off of fear, it's interesting that oftentimes horror films are actually very conservative in their values because they're about the fear of others, the fear of change, the fear of the various fears that drive our society.
Oh yeah, definitely. Also, Cody, please come over and be a guest on our show. We would love to have you.
Oh yes, absolutely. Too bad we couldn't get for this one. He'd be perfect, but maybe next year this time he'll come on and talk about some of the horror stuff. He is a true scholar of horror, and we'd be glad to have him here.
I will reiterate my one word that I just said, please. I'm seeing something that kind of annoys me about like the discussion of horror, and it's that maybe we should just re-examine these more non-fantastical horror works as elevated drama. No, we shouldn't do that, and we shouldn't even consider not having horror as its own elevated genre. Horror is the American genre, bar none. Some of our first works of literature, some of our best works of literature have been horror. I mean, like Rip Van Winkle, Olive Poe, Nathaniel Hawthorne's entire short fiction. Horror is at our roots, and to think that it is nothing less than pure literary drama is really selling it short. I despise that idea.
I mean, let's talk about the classic ghost story. What is a classic story? It's sitting around a campfire telling stories to entertain and keep the boogeyman away, basically. I mean, there's nothing more primal, original in storytelling than that type of concept.
Oh, definitely. Hey, I'll say one of the biggest horror works, one of the biggest literary works that exists, I think, in the world, and everyone knows this line, "Quoth the raven nevermore." That is a flat-out drama about a man whose wife has died and he can't cope with it, and he's projecting his psychological trauma onto a bird. Right? One of the best horror works of all time.
So horror good.
Horror good. We love horror. I wanted to bring up, I was saving this for this podcast, since we usually do a recommendation. Something that we're reading, something that maybe is calling out to us or something at the time. And I recently read a novel. I can't really say whether or not I love it. I don't think I do. So I thought I would go ahead and talk about that.
Well, I will point out that a lot of people recommended this novel to you, thinking you would enjoy it, including myself.
A shocking number of people recommended this to me. The first being my cousin, because I come from a really small town. He thought that this would appeal to me because I was talking a lot about moving just because I hated it there. And it wasn't exactly what I was looking for. I think really what I'm looking for is Twin Peaks the novel, which will never happen ever.
I'll keep working at that and see if I can find something for you. And again, if any of our listeners out there have an idea of what Twin Peaks the novel would look like, I'm sure Chris would enjoy your suggestions.
I would love to hear that. And no, I'm not talking about Twin Peaks or The Secret History of Twin Peaks, which is a great occult novel. You found that for me for like $1 in a trash bin somewhere.
Oh, I'll get this for Chris. It cost $1. He will think I did a fantastic job, and I'm actually spending lots of money on it because it was originally for like $30 or something like that. But yeah. It was in a like a Barnes and Noble $1. Please remove this from our store bin in Dallas somewhere.
It's a hard sell because it's presented as an actual historical document, and it's.
Oh, is it?
What is Carey referred to as an epistolary? The epistolary novel is it's a collection of documents. Yeah. The Secret History of Twin Peaks is that. It is an epistolary collection of newspaper clippings and documents and stuff. So not quite.
And let's talk about that because there seems to be a lot of horror novels which are based off of that. The House of Leaves is done that way.
What is House of Leaves? House of Leaves definitely is. In some cases,
Dracula.
Literally.
Original Dracula, Bram Stoker's Dracula, is done in that style. So it's a style that's used over and over again. The novella that the novel that you're talking about was based off of, original novella, is done in that style as well.
Stephen King loves it.
Lovecraft wrote most of his stuff in that type of style as well.
And I think after I talk about my book here, I kind of want to talk about Lovecraft because I have some opinions about Lovecraft that are, well, some of them are not surprising. Some of them are a little more critical, I think, in different ways. But I would like to talk about Lovecraft as well.
Okay.
But the novel that I'm referring to that I would like to, I guess, maybe recommend, I think it's better that we just talk about it first, is Stephen King's third novel, I believe, Salem's Lot. This thing is a colossal nightmare of a book. The copy I had was nearly 700 pages. I would say it deserves to be half that length, and the total amount of book that's actually really good is even less than that. It starts off very strong, and it was actually exactly what I was looking for. Some guy and this little kid that he's with are hiding out in Mexico, and they read a newspaper clipping that says that there's a mass disappearance in this little town called Salem's Lot. And they decide to go and deal with the problem. And then it goes to a back of how exactly they got to that point. Salem's Lot is not the worst small town in the world. I'll just say that aspect there straight up. That was one of the things that I was recommended on, is that small towns are so bad. It's not idyllic or anything, but Salem's Lot is not the worst town in the world. I don't know if that's what King was going for, but the worst that I even saw was there's some infidelity happening, and an old lady is a gossip.
I think King was more just trying to show what small town life is really like, because I think at the time most people were thinking in terms like the Andy Griffin show, that small town life is idyllic. And so I think he grew up in a small town in Maine, and so I think he was just basically saying, nope, this is what it's really like.
Yeah, this novel's 43 years old. The idea of the quaint little small town with, the picket fences and all this, it still kind of existed, and that's certainly how a lot of literature and especially a lot of TV were presenting it. For King, it was more of, there are real people and real issues that are happening everywhere, especially in small towns. It just so happens that word gets around faster when you have a lot of gossip happening. Really, what the small town is used to kind of elaborate on is how quickly something dangerous can spread, especially something like, say, a disease. Unfortunately, as we're discovering, the thing that disappointed me the most about Salem's Lot, and I had to remember within like the first chapter, was this is a vampire novel. This is a very classical vampire story, in fact. It refers to the works of like Bram Stoker as a literary historical novel. Like it's referred to as the old folk tales rather than just being a literal book of commercial fiction, which it was. There's a really nice build-up, just steady building of tension that occurs in this, where the vampire moves in, and one by one, the people in the town begin to succumb to these horrific attacks by the growing population of vampires. And that stuff, I think, is far and away the best part of the novel. But you have to suffer through the King tropes of main character as an author. The love interests have to, like, they go through the most mundane of mundane dates. There's an extended sequence of main character and love interest go on an ice cream social date. It's almost unreadable. And annoyingly, this love interest, this entire romance subplot goes nowhere. And the main writer, I wouldn't even call him a wet sponge. I would just call him a log. He just sits around and writes for most of the book.
Now, I did recommend it to you, but I will say it is not one of my favorites of the King stories. The one thing I took away from it that I really liked is it was the first experience I ever had of something that combined both the mythology and the science, which I thought was fascinating. Because I had been used to like Hammer horror films, old vampire films, where it's kind of like where you have to throw science out the window and you have to go with the old ways of garlic and a cross and stuff like that. This one gave explanations to things. It gave a little bit of science to it. There is a doctor in it who managed to defeat vampirism through science to some extent, which I thought was refreshing.
Not just science. He defeats vampires through rubbing alcohol.
Rubbing alcohol and penicillin.
Yes. Spoiler alert, he gets bitten and says, give me my alcohol, give me my medical bag, quick. I can feel it inside me. So he disinfects his vampire bites and goes, oh, thank God, I'm good now.
So I like that part of it. But you were not a fan. Again, you were looking for something, like you said, Twin Peaks, the novel. And yes, this is not Twin Peaks, the novel, unfortunately.
What I was really looking for was a small town with its own very distinct problems, and more than just its own problems, with its own character. The thing about Twin Peaks that I think people have really come away with is that it has this gigantic supporting cast, all who are very fleshed out and feel like real people, who just happen to be in a small town, so they have to kind of interact with each other. The characters of Salem's Lot, they are what they are, but there's not a focus specifically on individual character arcs between these citizens. They interact here and there, but they're just set dressing for the vampire story. Yeah, it is what it is. But as for the aspect that you really like, yeah, I do really agree on that. The problem I have is that it's inconsistent.
Sure.
The first vampire that they kill, No. It is the first one that they kill. One of the only ones that they actually do kill. They go through this long, arduous task of planning it out. And at this point, there are hundreds of vampires. So you kind of get this feeling of like, how in the world are they going to do this massive, almost ritual to kill every single vampire in town? And the answer is they really don't. But it's like, you got to stake them in the heart first, and then you have to cut off their head, and then put their body in a casket, and stuff their mouth full of roses, and turn the head all the way around, and then set their coffin out into a flowing body of water, and that will break the vampirism from them. And then they just say, well, what if we just stake them in the heart? Like, yeah, whatever, that'll work too. So what was the point of all the buildup? What was the point of all the ritual there? Why even bring all that stuff up if you're not going to use it later? Stuff like that bothers me.
I got you. Well, we've talked about this for 20 minutes now, so we should probably move on. I will say that there, just as an aside, this is one of the Ryan's trivia that he's learned over the years. Do you know where the staking the heart actually came from?
Bram Stoker was hungry.
No, what they used to do is they were afraid the dead would rise out of their coffins, so they literally nailed them to the coffin.
Okay, yeah,
that's what the nailing. It wasn't the fact that it was driving the stake through the heart. It was literally the people who were afraid the dead would become vampires and raised from the dead and start walking around would literally go and nail people into the coffin so they couldn't get up.
They were pinning them into it.
They were pinning it into the coffin. It's interesting how the whole mythology is built up around for something that was just a practical solution. What, the dead are rising? Oh, let's make sure they don't do this. Let's nail them into the coffin. Literally nail them to the coffin so they can't get up.
You know, Philip and I were talking about this, I couldn't remember what it was. It's just some things that Philip and I, the other circulation manager, talk about. We were talking about cannibalism for some reason.
As you do.
As you do, yeah. You just decide to talk about cannibalism one day. And we were talking about there's a disease that humans can get if they eat other human brains, specifically a prion in the brain. A prion?
Prion.
A P word in the brain. Something about the way that this works, if you eat it, you come down with a disease called Kuru. And Kuru is actually, it has its own folklore with, like, there's an indigenous tribe somewhere who had, like, an outbreak of it because part of their culture was cannibalism, eating the corpses of people. So we started to talk about, like, how utterly fascinating is it that these folk tales have a historical basis. They have a scientific basis. The other one that I mentioned that I'm really fascinated with, because I had to write about it in non-Western abnormal psych was Wendigo psychosis.
Mm-hmm.
And this is literally because people would go insane because they needed something to eat, and they would just eat other people who were also in the mountains. But there's also a scientific basis idea of starvation, the mental break that it would take for someone to become a cannibal, and it became its own folklore. It became its own tale that people would use to kind of like scare each other into don't do that, Ari. And the fact that vampires were put a stake in them so they don't get out of their coffin, which is also why for a while, I can't remember where I was reading about this, or maybe I was talking to someone about it, but they would put essentially one of those old set of can phones inside of a coffin so that people could yell that they were buried alive too early. Or
that was
like
a big, huge fear in the Victorian age, mid-19th century, because apparently medical science was very bad at containing people who were dead were actually just in comas.
Which happened a lot. They'd put like a string that they could ring for a bell on their coffin. So you would be in the graveyard and you'd see this bell going off like, oh crap, we buried someone again.
And it wasn't that unusual. They'd actually sell these things, and there'd be graveyards which would have these little either bells or something where the person could signal, hey, I'm still alive down here. That went away with embalming, because once you start embalming people, although it happens nowadays, it happens in the news every once in a while, somebody is sent out to be embalmed, and the person starting to do the embalming fluid goes, wait a minute, no, this person's still alive. Dead people's blood does not behave like this, and they have to revive them. There was a woman, I want to say just a few months ago, that happened to.
That's horrifying, by the way. That's one of my biggest fears. Being assumed to be dead.
It happens.
So we've talked about literature. We've talked about horror. We've made friends along the way.
More importantly, we've talked about cannibalism, vampires, and being buried alive, which, of course, is just a good time all around.
Come to the library, please, if you would like to discuss cannibalism with us.
I'm sure some people have been turned off by this episode of our podcast. We will change the subject next week because we are going to talk about what's coming up. We're going to do next. What do you think we should cover next week? Well, obviously we've covered cannibalism, being buried alive, vampires, and whether or not Stephen King is a good writer.
Well, we're going to next week we're going to turn this podcast into just a straight up true crime one. So
just true crime. You want to go with true crime? True crime is not a genre I'm well read in, to tell you the absolute truth.
Yeah, let's not do that. It's very miserable. But yeah, we'll go back into a more traditional library talk after this. But by the time this one airs, or better yet, by the time we record the next episode, the first episode will have aired, so we'll have a better idea of what exactly it is that our listeners are interested in and what about the library they want to know about. I will say this, though, because between this episode and the next one, the election will have happened. And I'm not going to get political. I don't have nearly enough alcohol to get as political as I'd like to be. Plus, as a library, we're not here to tell you how to do things. We're here to tell you, or why to do things. We're here to tell you how to do something. So all I want to say is, please vote.
Yeah.
I don't care how you vote. Just please vote. Make sure that your voice is heard. If you have any questions on how to vote, because by now it's way too late unfortunately, by the time this airs, it's too late to get your voter registration in. That's been a month out by this point. But if you need to know where to go, if you need to know how to vote, let's be honest, we had, I think in the Florida election, even in the most recent one, you had full-grown adults who were utterly baffled by the system. If you have any questions, if there's anything you need to know how to do, please come by and ask us. We are more than happy to help, especially with this election. It's no matter what your political beliefs are, this is a major one. It's going to be a very long time before we get into an election that's this contentious. So if you have any questions at all, just please come by and ask. We'll help you out. We'll do whatever it takes to help. That's what we're here for. We're information specialists.
Well said, well said.
Thank you.
Well, we're coming up to the hour.
We are. Whole hour.
We blew through that with talking about horror the whole time.
We could do this for literally hours.
We'll probably come back to horror at some point. did we want to start doing something like this? Maybe focus on a genre every time? Like maybe, we talked a little bit about horror. We maybe focus on science fiction, focus on romance, focus on historical, focus on just the various different topics of literature maybe every time?
Not every time, but I think every now and then we definitely should have like a genre special.
Okay.
In fact, maybe that's what we'll call this one, the horror special. I can't wait until us old chunk of coal grown men begin the romance special.
We'll have to bring in a guest, obviously, for that.
We will definitely need a guest on that one.
Yeah.
We'll bring in my wife, whose favorite movie is I probably shouldn't even say this, but her favorite movie is Gone with the Wind. Not for those reasons, for the romance reasons, I promise.
We could bring in my mom. I mean, my mom has, I'm sure at this moment, she has 7 romance books checked out from the local library. My mom is one of the reasons I became a librarian, is because she took me to the library all the time. Oh, and it's because she would check out these trashy little romance novels constantly.
That's cool, though. I mean, I'm sure we have our own section here at the library just for trashy Harlequin romance. My mom, I don't know why, but my mom is into specifically Amish romance. I don't know why. I don't get it. It's not for me to judge. There is a whole genre of Amish romance.
What was the Harrison Ford movie? Witness?
You talking about The Fugitive?
No. It was a Harrison Ford movie named The Witness. I'm pretty sure. Let me check.
The Witness from 1985, neo-noir crime drama. He got whoa. Oh, he only got nominated for Best Actor for this.
That's the only time I've ever heard of the Amish romance genre. Well, that's more of an Amish crime romance thing. I don't know.
It had a little more. Oh my God. Okay, there's a Wikipedia article. I'll link this if I can remember. If I can remember to do this by the time we post this, I will link this in the comments. Wikipedia has its own Amish romance article. It's not very long. It's not a very big article, but the fact that it has its own Wikipedia article.
You know what? Let's do that next time. Let's talk about genres and subgenres.
I think we could do that. Just for our next podcast, we'll break down what genres are.
Yeah, try to give a good definition of genres. Because both you and me have read lots of genre fiction, various different sorts. I've taken several classes on genre. I've taught a genre fiction class. So
the fact that there was so much to actually teach and you had to drop a lot of for weird fiction, for Lovecraftian horror. Weird fiction is the literary term for it, but Lovecraftian horror. The fact that there was so much and you had to drop some of the literature because there was just too much in the class, that blew me away. I had no idea. Well, we'll do that next time. I think that's going to be a great topic, and maybe we'll actually talk about the library a little bit.
Oh, maybe. Who cares?
I can't promise anything like that.
Once again, if you want any of these books or any of these movies we've talked about, if we do not have them in the library and you are a student here, we can order them from the library for you. So anything you want to get your hands on, we are capable of doing so. So when this airs, Thanksgiving will be that weekend. If there's something you want to check out and watch, or you want to read or something like that, come by the library, check it out. We will have it. Even if we don't have it here, we may be able to find it somewhere else for you.
You know what's insane to me is that I talked about this with you before, but I wanted to mention it for the audience. We don't have a whole lot of David Lynch, but for some reason we have a copy of Inland Empire, which is an extraordinarily rare film. It was never distributed properly in the U.S. I think there was like one run of it. We have it. I don't know why. That's also a very, very scary movie.
And I think you should end every single podcast with that fact, because I think you ended one of the earlier ones with that.
I probably did. Yeah, but I'll do it next time too. Guys, you wouldn't believe this, even though I've talked about it before, but we have a copy of Inland Empire. Please watch Inland Empire. It's so good. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, just please let us know. We'd be more than happy to talk about that on our podcast.
Oh, we should also mention we are planning possibly of having guests coming up in the next coming weeks. We'll see if that happens or not. We won't say anything at this point. Let's find out if it's actually going to happen before we say too much more about it, I think.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. We are very much working on figuring out how we could get a guest on. We'd love to have someone from an outside institution come in and talk with us. I have someone in mind that I would like to ask, but yeah, please look forward to that. We'll let you know. We'll let you know exactly who it is before we actually post it, and if we actually can get them on board. But yeah, that'll be in the near future.
Go out and vote and have a happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween, everyone.